This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Welcome, Justin.
Thank you, Amanda.
It's so good to be back. It has been a long time between Thoughtful Travel book clubs. I'm so sorry. And to anyone who's listening, Justin has reminded me
I've been nagging
at least 3 or 4 times. I would say polite nagging.
Polite nagging? Yes. I'd always be polite when I nag.
Yeah, no, you were very polite with your nagging, but very justified because I was so slow on this. It's just been one of those crazy busy years. Now the rest of the year is looking a bit better. So thank you for the nags. And also reassured me that you are a very willing participant. So I'm pleased about that.
I'm not here against my wishes.
No, that's right. Exactly. Yes. I haven't chained you down. Of course, you're on the other side of the country, so that would be hard.
That's right, yes.
So today we are talking about Raynor Winn's The Wild Silence. And, of course, last year or the one before, we talked about the Salt Path. Actually, don't know if that was 2 years ago.
It could have been 2, I think.
Yeah, it probably was.
In our first year.
It was a very popular
It was a surprise.
one.
I think I remember at the time saying I probably wouldn't have picked it up, but it kind of was really surprising and I really enjoyed it in the end. So
Ditto.
Yeah.
I remember that Joan Dodds from the Thoughtful Travellers Facebook group recommended it, and I hadn't even heard of it or anything. And now, like, she's everywhere, and she's got her 3rd book out like this week in the UK. Land.
Yeah, I didn't even know there was a 3rd one coming.
Yes, so I'm looking for that's going to be one of my Christmas presents to myself. This time, The Wild Silence.
Which is ironic because in this book, it kind of covers that whole becoming a writer in many ways as well.
Yes, that part was very interesting to me because, you know, one day I'd like to get a book out there. So I liked those moments, except she just wrote the book, sent it to one person, and bingo, got a contract, which is one of those quite frustrating things as an aspiring writer, because that's not the normal way it happens. But I understand why. She's an amazing writer with a great story.
And she had a very interesting story to tell, which is often part of the thing. You either got to come up with a good story or have a good story. So
yeah, exactly.
And then tell it well as well. So
yeah. So Wild Silence. Your overall thoughts first, Justin. Did you enjoy it, and how does it compare?
For me, because it strictly isn't really, I guess, strictly isn't travel, but it's non-fiction, which tends to be one of my preferred genre. Yeah, I started off slow, and I'm like going, and I'm kind of like going, yeah, but I want to get to juicy bits in the book. But it's just like I'm kind of now feeling like I've got to read her books now if they're all about her and her partner's story now, because it's like a never-ending story, and I want to hear about what they get up to. And this one's kind of picks up from where they left off and goes in all sorts of directions and ends up in Iceland, which is, you know, amazing because everybody who goes to Iceland loves Iceland. Mm-hmm. Everybody who hasn't gone wishes they were. Been. So, yeah, I mean, I think it was as good as her previous book. It's a little bit different, but in the fact that you've kind of got more details about their life together, both with a mother and with her partner Moth, and then also the fact that things, you know, her story was starting to get out in the world as well, because she published a book, and how that changed everything, and how, you know, the health of Moth was going. And there's just so many little storylines,
side tangents, and you
know, and being real life, none of it kind of ended. It's, you get to the end of the book, and then it's like, now what happens in their life next? So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. Like the various parts were, like, apart from the Iceland section, the 4th section, they weren't necessarily travel based, although there was a lot of back to their early days as a couple and lots of hikes and, you know, interesting stories like that, which I really liked, having just been on a hike, not as long as some of theirs or as treacherous as some of theirs, but I'm in the hiking mindset, so that was kind of nice. But yes, my favourite section was 100% the Iceland section because, I'm a big fan of Iceland. So
I don't think I didn't even know of that walk, but I did know the beginning point and the end point. I had heard of the beginning point, and it was kind of like, I think it was when I was researching, you need a 4-wheel drive to get up there or something like that. And so I didn't actually, but I did get to the end point. So
same. So yeah, I did love that bit.
I think the first point I've kind of got down was like how when they're in their little village, they're still in that mindset that being homeless carries that stigma, and so she didn't really get involved with anyone, and even when she did get involved in like a local, I forget what it was now, craft group, or there was a group of ladies doing something one day.
They were doing flower arranging, I think.
Flower arranging, yeah. And even then, it kind of leaked out that they were kind of homeless, and I think most of the people were okay about it. And the next thing you know, that developed into, oh, you're a writer, before she'd even had a book published, and I think she'd had an article or something published.
Yeah, she'd had that article published in the big issue, I think. Yeah.
And how that all kind of steamrolled out of sort of in many ways out of control, but in a good way. But at the whole time there was always an undercurrent that there is a stigma attached to people who are homeless, and even that then linked into the fact that she actually met someone on the doing the trial who had read about her story, probably in one of the local newspapers, I think, or something like that, and then decided he was going to stop living rough on the streets of Exeter, I think it was, and do the walk as well. And but even then, I didn't get the impression she told him that it was her.
No, she still didn't say. So she's very modest about it. Yeah. Even though she'd had caused this massive change in this guy's life. And she still didn't say anything.
And she probably feels great about it. But it just didn't.
She seems a very, very humble person. So
so that whole storyline seemed to go through, and even going through to the middle section of the book after a book was sort of around the time a book was published, I think it was, and they got invited to go sit in a house and look after a farm and rewild and all that. And even then, the whole time, she didn't feel like it was right, and she had so many doubts. And it was just in my mind, I'm just going, no, this is all good. I didn't even need to read the book. I knew it was all going to be good. There was just I'd like to know, and that'd probably be in the third book, what her feelings are around that stigma associated with homelessness, because I think it's real, but I think the world is also hopefully moving on to be the better, and people not judging it as they're more finding out reasons why, and not just assuming being homeless is because of drug use or because of financial problems. So
I would like to think so. Hey, I know one of the fastest growing demographics for homelessness in Australia is women in their 50s and 60s who divorced, no super and all of that. So so
but I mean it's a real issue, and hopefully there's good coming of it, I guess, from her story.
Like books like hers, stories like hers that I was going to say. So I really like all that stuff that you highlighted. And then there was a couple of bits on mine. I was thinking a lot about the nature part. So there was a lot of, obviously the rewilding on the farm, but there was also, she wrote really eloquently about the benefits of being in nature and the research that proves, quite chemically and scientifically the benefits of being out there, and, having had, a full week away from my desk, that really rings true to me, especially. And I like to quote when she talked about a camping trip they'd done some years ago in Scotland. And I'll just read my favourite bit. It said, saturated by the empty environment we'd passed through, we had no words to hold the feeling. We didn't need any. The sense of wholeness was enough. And that to me is like the Aussie bush is like that, being out somewhere, empty and vast and amazing just gives you that, wholeness, I think is a good word for it. So.
Yeah, I think anyone who enjoys bushwalking or even just going for long drives somewhere in the middle of nowhere where there's no one around probably knows what that feeling is like and why it's so good for them. But
it was eloquently explained, I thought.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to pick up, and you picked up on this in your notes, Justin, was the Twitter thing. So, as a social media kind of person.
And I think it goes to age as well with some people. Like they'll look at the technology, and some people will take it head on because it's one of those stereotypes that kind of obviously has some basis of truth behind it, but not everyone is going to be like that. And lots of people will take it head on and they'll go with it, and then others are scared that it's going to bring nothing but. And that's kind of where she really stood on this new world. On
social media, yeah. But she was being kind of pushed to do it because, got a book coming out, all of that sort of stuff. But then, her kind of stumbling into Twitter and not really knowing what it's about, and then one of the first messages she replies to turns out to be this guy who has this farm, who they go and meet, and that's where they end up living to rewild the farm. I mean, that's social media working for you.
Even that whole process quite a lot of convincing. It's like,
yeah.
And I
understandably, because it is
understandably
pretty random.
But at the same time, then you're like going, well, this is, especially given how they, in the first book, how they got into their situation with being homeless, and how I think it was a friend of her husband had decided to just rip them off and take everything.
That was awful.
You sort of think, how could anyone do that? And then here on the flip side is someone doing something completely the opposite, and knowing that these people will care for this property that they have and letting them live there. So
I think it speaks to how well you feel like you get to know her through her writing.
Yeah.
Because I think, she seems to have that really, quite unique, humble, really, really wholesome personality, I suppose. And it seems to shine through. And so therefore you can imagine someone saying, yeah, I trust you to fix my farm, basically.
I think when you're reading it, you just kind of feel really happy about it, that part of the book did work out. And
yes.
I hope the next book covers more in detail where they get to with all of that. So and any more walks they do. So.
Well, I think it's mostly centered on a walk. And actually, Pam, you might know this because you're an expert on this. Let me unmute you. Can you tell us? So, Pam, you're in the UK right now. So do you know where Landlines covers? It's a big walk, isn't it? Her new book?
It's been out here for a few weeks and I'm going out to buy it on Tuesday.
Yay.
So I'll get back to you. I think it covers their walk in Scotland in the Great Glen Way.
That sounds
I think
familiar.
That's what I remember reading.
Yes, it is something like that. And I'm sure you're right when you say Scotland. I think that's right. So, and I mean, in the Wild Silence, they talk about a lot of their previous walks in Scotland. So it makes sense that they would go back. Yeah.
My question is, do they have a Paddy Dillon guidebook for it? Because that was another thing.
That's a very good question. Can you believe Paddy Dillon had a guidebook for this part of Iceland that they walked in? I was amazed by
I have no idea who Paddy Dillon is, really.
Me neither.
But I know he writes walking books and he seems to do it at a really quick pace.
Yeah, I was going to say he must have long legs, this Paddy Dillon. So, yes. Philippa has just arrived. We're going to let Philippa in too. Philippa joined us for our last book club. And if anyone else is watching on Facebook Live and you want to join us, then the link is in Facebook in the Thoughtful Travellers group. So just hop in. Philippa, hello.
No matter if you've got a glass of wine or whatever you prefer to drink, that's all good.
Yes, well, I want to move on to Iceland soon. But before that, I would like to ask Pam and Philippa, what are your thoughts about The Wild Silence? Did you read it recently and what do you think? So, Pam, do you want to tell us first? Oh, she's got a copy there. Well done, Pam.
It's like a real book
club. Oh, you two are the best book club people. Thank you. So, Pam, tell us your overview thoughts.
I'm going to be a little bit controversial in present company.
Uh-oh. Well, I'll just
and say
kick you out.
The Iceland section was not my favourite section.
Oh.
I do. I mean, yes, I would love to do a walk like that and I'd love to go to Iceland. But in the context of this book, for me, it was more her reflections, I think, around the time when she went back to where she grew up, the farm, and her recollections of her life then and how it has impacted her current life in her closeness to nature and to the land and to what she wants to do, I guess. Yeah, so that's what I found most interesting. She's doing a lot of, self-analysis and where she's come from, where she's going to, and how her childhood has impacted on the life they live now and the life they want to live now. That was for me the most fascinating bit.
I'll allow that.
I do want to do Iceland. But yes, the current book, Landlines, it's been out here for about 3 weeks, I think now, but it only comes out in hardback here, and you've got to wait a year for the paperback, which I'm not prepared to do. But it is more expensive, so I've had to factor it into the budgeting.
Right.
But this week I'm going to go get that. And she's actually doing a book tour to a lot of bookshops and that, and doing talks, but nothing remotely close to where I am at the moment. So I'm a little bit peeved about that.
That's very frustrating. Yeah.
Hopefully she'll do a tour of Australia.
That would be amazing, wouldn't it? It's on my list to look up her PR and see if I can at least get her on the podcast.
Yes.
Yeah, especially because this third book is very much a travel-related book again. So,
but she does seem very introverted and, doesn't seem to want to put herself out there too much. even with a social media now on Instagram and that, there's not much goes up, and what is very, looks as though it's what her publicist has said, you've got to do this now.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
I think in many ways her writing came about. She seems to be a very good writer, but I think it really came about because it was a means to an end, because she needed something to do. And it's sad that that's how it came about, because she's obviously very talented, and, she's probably got quite a lot of books. So, she's up to a third book now. So
because she wrote it because Moth was forgetting about the initial walk, and that's but thank goodness. It's very sad, but thank goodness that she did, because obviously the success of that would have helped turn their lives around as well. So
and I will say, I think it's turned a lot of people's lives around as well, from the comments that you read on her social media and that sort of thing. I think a lot of people have really taken it to heart and taken her words and thought, we can do this. It's mentioned so often on the Facebook page for the Southwest Coastal Path. Her book is mentioned regularly. Have you read it? And people are saying yes, and this is what it did for me, and that. So
that's so nice.
It just shows where things can lead. As you said, she started doing it so that Moth would have these memories, and look where it's led. Done much bigger than that, not just her.
Yeah, it's so lovely. Oh, I love that. Thank you, Pam. Philippa, tell us your thoughts about the book as a whole.
Like Justin, I think, and yourself, I read it quite a long time ago, good few months ago now, I think, and find it different, but chimed a lot with Salt Path. I found there was this theme about they almost didn't connect, in a way that she was processing this, and she is very introverted and reflective, but at the same time she's speaking very openly about that in a forum that means that she will be getting a lot of the attention she doesn't seek. So I found it quite interesting in that sense. And before I go into the book itself, obviously in the UK, and you've probably felt this as well, Pam, there's been a lot of publicity around around the launches and sort of in local bookshops and things. But she was also interviewed on morning television maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and that was fascinating because she was so quiet and her voice is very subdued, and she's just totally not like anyone who's normally being interviewed, because you almost wanted to kind of say, look here, have a biscuit and come and talk to us, kind of thing, and speak up a little bit, because she was so quiet. And I also went to a book club in the next village in Scotland, and it's a newly set up book club. And the woman who's running it, puts on a book club every month, and we meet together in the bookshop. And she came back. She'd just been in London the week before at book events that were going on there. And she was bursting with excitement. She says, I've just met Raynor Winn. And she'd been going down on the train from Edinburgh to London, and she'd been checking the social media. And Raynor Winn had put a post out basically saying, I'm going to be in Waterstones in London this evening. If anybody's there and got nothing to do, come along. And she was like, I've got nothing to do. And so she went along and, was treated to a surprise evening with Raynor. Moth was there, had lots of attention from lots of, kind of women my age probably, who were very interested. Everybody was asking after Moth. Really interesting, because I feel that with her writing being so unassuming, with her persona being so quiet and gentle, that there's just such a kind of, it's not a tension, it's just a kind of almost a contradiction in there. And I found what was really interesting for me about the writing is that, as you said, that she captured this. She didn't write the book to write the book. She wrote the book partly as a way of recording the memories for Moth, but I think also as almost a cathartic process, because you've got all of these things going around. You've got these experiences and these memories and these thoughts about why did this work? And one of the ways of processing it is to write it down and document it, not necessarily with the intent of it appearing on a bookshelf, but just having been through a serious health issue myself and blogged the hell out of it, that helped me really process and document it and see it from a perspective. And I feel that was probably a large part of this book process as well. And of course, it did catch the attention through the big issue, through for various means as well.
Yeah.
So I found it I think like Justin, you were saying earlier on, it's not the book that you read for a gripping plot line or for cutting edge adventure travel. It's very much reflective process. It's about what the whole experience that they had on the walk had on their lives. And it's about documenting and capturing that and sharing it and making it available to so many others. So I found it a really reflective read, very informative in terms of where she went, very informative in terms of the health benefits and, you know, the research you can do, but also just really insightful in terms of what it teaches you about yourself and your experiences and how you process them. So I'm sorry, that doesn't sound as if it was very much about the book at all.
No, it all makes sense. Because I think that is what it's like. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm really looking forward to, like Pam, I have a real problem with hardback books. I love them to look at. I can't read them. They're too heavy. They fall on my
I was just going to say that even to lie in bed with them, they're heavy and annoying. So aside from the extra cost,
or packing a bag to go traveling with, they just take up too much space.
Absolutely.
So.
Yes.
I know. That was what I loved about Kindles, but Kindles just aren't the same. But one thing, obviously, with it being a major part of it is in Scotland. I think she starts at the very, very north coast at Cape Wrath, and then they walk all the way down the length of the UK, which I'm really looking forward to, you know, obviously having been brought up in rural Scotland and living in not rural Scotland, but semi-rural. I'm really looking forward to that element of the next book or the current book.
Yeah. Oh, I can't wait. Yes, we'll have to make it a book club book again.
First author gets 3 books. Wow.
Yeah. I really like her, Justin.
No, I do too. Her writing's had that effect on everyone who's read the books, it seems. So, you know, it's. And I mean, I was just going to say, I do a blog for my travels, and the main reason I do it is not because I want everyone in the world to read it, but it's for my own memory's sake as well, because I can't remember things I did. I can't remember places, and I don't even put that much details in there, but it's enough to sort of jog my memory to remember the key things that happened, you know, on a trip to some country 10 years ago that I don't remember now.
Yeah,
I know I went there, but I'll read the blog and go, oh, that's right. I remember that night in that restaurant and things like that. So it makes perfect sense to write it all down. And if it's such a good story, put it in your book. So, you know, I think it was Moth who convinced us to even publish it, wasn't it? Was it?
I know that her daughter read it and said it's amazing, you should do something with it. But then I can't quite remember what happened, how she eventually... I think she actually then then she kind of Googled how to find an agent or something. But as I recall, she kind of just sent it to one and they loved it, and suddenly she was in the Penguin offices and whammo, which is every aspiring author's dream.
She just sent it straight to Penguin.
Oh, I can't remember. I thought she had an agent.
She'd always wanted to have something published by Penguin, and I think she sent it straight to them.
How lovely. I mean, also well-deserved. Because
the publisher must have been thrilled. It was like, oh, we don't have to filter through all these unsolicited book submissions. We've got a gem here. Yeah,
exactly. I remember she arrived at the publishers meeting, which she thought was just with one person, and then there was like a room full of people saying, we decided we'd all want to meet you today or something. And it was a bit overwhelming, I imagine. But it's all had a good result. I want to talk about Iceland. Sorry, Pam.
Okay.
Because it is, I mean, every part of the book has its specialness, but the Iceland section was that's a classic travel narrative kind of section, I suppose. And, you know, I love Iceland. So I know you've got some notes on this too, haven't you, Justin? But we both mentioned about being a Paddy Dillon guidebook again. She was concerned about something in the guidebook, which made me giggle after some of the descriptions of parts of the Cape to Cape track that I've just been on. And she said, the guidebook says steep and rugged climbing with some narrow exposed ridges. And from her past Paddy Dillon experience, she thought if he was saying that, it must be really, really hard. So that was kind of like the worrying explanation. Justin, you noted about the success measurement using Paddy Dillon.
Yeah, I wasn't really keeping track of it throughout the first book, but it got mentioned quite a lot. Like, you know, Paddy Dillon would do this walk in one day, but we'll just stop here, you know, this section. But for them, they got a whole Paddy Dillon section done in one day and not 3, I think, were the exact words in the book. And for them, that was probably a bit of a highlight. Incredible, a piece of a success that they'd actually achieved such a thing. Like I said, I don't know how hard that is. I've not done a Paddy Dillon guided, like read a Paddy Dillon book for a walk to see if they're just unrealistic.
I have to know more about this bloke. I'm going to Google him later.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it's just. I guess if you're doing those kind of long walks, you're always kind of talking to yourself the whole time. Like in your head, you're like, just got to get up this hill and then it's all going to be downhill after it. And so you continually, any little thing that can, especially
there's a lot of psychology in it.
Yeah, yeah. And so for them, it was just, hey, we've done a whole section in one day.
Well, they were under some time pressure too, weren't they? Because winter was arriving.
Winter was coming, and Iceland does shut down in winter, I believe, quite a lot.
Yes. Well, and understandably, because, I mean, I was there in high summer and it was already crazy cold. I don't know. I just can't imagine being there in winter. So
yeah. So because I think a lot of the services, and Europe does this in general as well, but in Iceland, it's just worse. Like there's no, the buses, the public transport that runs just gets cold right back. So
because nobody should be out there because they're going to die, basically.
Yeah. So and you read that bit at the beginning, you sort of think, I think because they basically decided it was now or never to go do this walk with their friends, and so you probably didn't necessarily realise how fine they were cutting it. But I
don't think they did either until they were there and they sort of realised how extreme that was.
But then even then they still did. Everyone kind of stopped at that first. There was a first spot where they could get a public bus, and everyone kind of got that far, and then all the younger people in it, did that, and they walked all the way to Skogafoss to the waterfall, which there's not much there either from memory. There's a little hut or a cafe, or I don't even know.
Nearly everything in Iceland is kind of the middle of nowhere. It's not, it's
a
fairly sparsely populated place. So yeah.
Well, I remember they mentioned they get to the top of the lookout of the waterfall, and I, like most people, would go to the waterfall are at the bottom, and I looked at the lookout and gone, I don't feel like climbing up there today. Yeah,
that looks like a long tall hike. I agree.
Yeah.
But speaking of the middle of nowhere, this is just a quote about their beginning point, and I'm sorry, my Icelandic pronunciation is terrible, but Landmannalaugar, maybe. But I love this. She said it's not really a place that should have a name, more a word on a map that people collect around. And I thought that's such a lovely description of, a place that really is nothing, but I enjoyed that bit. Oh, yes. And Justin, you mentioned Skogafoss and the influences ruining the pictures there and stuff. Yeah. So, yeah. There's unfortunately a few spots like that in Iceland.
I think, in the southern part of Iceland, my experience was all the way around to, I forget, Jökulsárlón, I think it's called, with the icebergs in the lake. But once you go past there and you go up to the north and do the rest of the island, there was hardly anyone. Well, I say hardly anyone. The tourist numbers dropped right down. But that southeastern part of Iceland is just so scenic, full of
and it's sort of day trippable plus a bit from Reykjavik and
Reykjavik. So it's just a stunning place in the world. So it's understandable.
It's very stunning. Yes, actually, I just saw on my second page that I copied a quote from page 233, which describes Iceland to me perfectly. She said, "A landscape so new, so alien, my eyes could barely process the sight." It's Iceland to a T.
I think it was
very different
because I was there 6 years ago now. I think it was 2016, but I still can vividly remember like these landscapes that I'd never seen before, like lava fields that were covered in like a moss. And they just stretched for miles as far as the eye could see, and then these rocks that jutted out at weird angles. It's
very special.
And then all these magnificent waterfalls. There's more waterfalls than you can. In fact, I think the in joke with my friend and I was like, this is like going to Europe and being sick and tired of seeing all these cathedrals. Here, it's like, how many waterfalls can we actually see if we stop being amazed by them? So,
yes, I can understand that. Although I think my answer is a lot because they're very scenic and all different.
We didn't reach the limit, so.
But I can see why you would have that conversation. Yes. Okay, Pam. Thoughts on Iceland section or you're an intrepid hiker, so did it sound interesting, etc.?
It did, yes. And just because I say it was not my favourite part of the book does not mean that I didn't like it. And yes, it did make me think, here's another one to add to my list. Possibly not quite at that time of the year when there's this mad rush to get to the end.
Yeah.
That is not me.
That's stressful for me, yeah.
But yes, just the landscape, and as you say, the way that she describes the landscape. And because of the type of person she is, she's not one of these, major adventurers who stride across the landscape and you think, oh, God, I could never do that. You can really relate to her. You can, think, well, if she can do it, so can I, sort of thing. So, yes, I did definitely put that down on my list. It was one of those things that I'd not thought of. I'd not thought of a hike in Iceland, but it's particularly because I'm closer now for a limited time. Admittedly, there's so many to on that list. It's a landscape that I would be intrigued to see, and just her description of some of it did remind me a little bit of the Himalayas. I might be totally wrong when it comes to seeing it, but just the way she describes some parts of it, I could sort of relate a bit to the base camp trek. Maybe it's just the same sort of climate, the ice and the snow and that sort of thing. But yeah, so yes, it may not have been my favourite part of the book, but it was definitely very interesting, and worth putting it in there, so to speak.
Oh, that would be interesting.
If you want a hiking buddy, Amanda, when you do it, put my hand up.
All right, let's go. It would be interesting to know, if anyone who has been to, in the Himalayas and in both, Iceland, that kind of comparison, because it makes sense to me that kind of it could match up. So, Philippa, any extra thoughts on Iceland section?
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously I'm coming at it having not been to Iceland, but being fascinated again by the landscape and having lived in the Himalayas. I lived in Nepal for 5.5 years.
Right.
So I'm very, very familiar with not the high Himal, but being based in Kathmandu, but traveling extensively throughout the country. But it reminded me weirdly more of Mongolia. When the way it was described, just in that it's completely different. And similarly, when I landed in the Galapagos, you come into the Batavia, I can't remember the name of the island, which is the airport island, and it's just a completely different landscape. And when you talked about the lava and the rock formations and, that kind of, this is really different to anywhere I've ever seen before. So that I found very striking. In terms of where it felt in the book, it was interesting because almost geographically it felt as if it didn't fit. But in terms of the story, it fitted. So I had that kind of thing going on where it's like, oh, we're in Iceland and it's really interesting and I'm intrigued, but I'm a bit confused about why I'm here, kind of thing. But I'm not confused because I can see it's in the story. So I felt it was quite an interesting way that was part of the story process, if you like. But I felt I really enjoyed the descriptions because having never been to Iceland, and it's on my many places that I would love to go to, but time and circumstances mean it's unlikely now. I still want to continue reading and learning and hearing about it. And I think her perspective was really insightful because it wasn't the usual, we did this and we saw all of that. It was all about that, the physical and the personal struggle and physical, and not struggle, the arduous nature of it, both psychologically and physically, and where it was for her and Moth on their life journey as well.
Yeah, I totally I actually remember the first time I actually listened to it as an audiobook, and some audiobooks have the chapter titles and some don't, but I remember just kind of opening up the file, and my friend Catherine had listened to it first, and I messaged her immediately saying, I hate any kind of spoiler, but oh my God, is the last part in Iceland? Because the titles all looked like Icelandic names, and I was like, but I didn't want to know anymore, and I was like, don't tell me, but oh my God, if that's true, I'm so excited. And but it did seem like a weird juxtaposition of it, but you're right with the whole, their life journey and their internal journey and Moth's health, it all fits in. But I remember being very excited at that moment.
Yeah,
thought, hey.
She was pushing the whole time to get him out walking again as well. So I think in that ways that it did fit into the book at the end. But it feels out of place, but it also, as far as their stories going, it's probably where she was up to in telling the story. And
it's the life journey.
Yeah, it's a life journey more than travel And but yeah, it's interesting because to me, my view of Iceland was the closest place I've ever been to that matches up to it would be New Zealand, but not in the same locations. Like there'd be a bit of New Zealand that looks a bit like this bit of Iceland, and then you have to go all the way down to the South Island to see another bit of New Zealand. You go, oh, this could be nice.
Right.
So
yeah,
and even like the bits of the Himalayas I've seen, there's some similarities, and then there's like, but the mountains aren't that high, and there's not as much ice as you think there would be either. And I think that's why people who go there want to go back and enjoy it so much, because it is actually very dissimilar to everywhere else in the world.
So unique,
because it's volcanic. There's ice. It's just it's amazing what actually can live there that far north, and
extreme temperatures,
yeah,
and that sparsity population, which is very similar to Mongolia as well. I mean, you drive for hours and see nothing. And I remember the first time when I was traveling out to our project areas from Ulaanbaatar, and we got the flight, and I'd expected an hour's flight, not realizing it was a 4-hour flight from one end and a different time zone. And that blew my mind, because you just don't realize that Mongolia is that huge a landmass, and yet the population is only 2.6 million, and 1 million are in the capital. So it's like population is minute.
It's crazy,
and that,
isn't it?
That sparsity is really makes you realize, just as humans, we might be messing up the planet, but we're really tiny and insignificant. And,
we are managing to ignore significant chunks of the planet not even being there. Yeah. I know. Whenever you see a population density kind of ranking, because Australia is fairly low in density, but then you see Mongolia and you think, wow, that is a very, very empty country. So it's fascinating. Hey, so I can see how some of that would also overlap with the Icelandic kind of look. Yeah. Okay, Justin, do you have any other bits and pieces that you want to share with us?
I did find there was that one little section in, I did make a quick note that there was a couple of guys that they were hiking along, and you go back to this whole stigma of being homeless and what people would think. And this just goes to show you can be the most loveliest people, because that's what they certainly sound like in the book, and then jump to these conclusions that you've kind of been brainwashed. And, this couple of guys that just assumed had wives at home, and it turned out that they were a couple themselves, and it just never crossed their mind that they were a couple. And I just like how it was only a small section in the book. It's like a paragraph, they mention it, but then when you think back, and it's like, and on the other hand, here that they were dealing with this whole idea that everyone would think because they're homeless, it was because of all these wrong reasons, and jump to the wrong conclusions. And so, and it's not a bad thing in any way. I think it's just you kind of live in your part of the world, and it's very hard to be aware of all these other things.
And
you will I jump to the wrong conclusions sometimes, and you apologize and move on, and
yes, it doesn't mean that you're not a bad person. That whole unconscious bias that it just comes up as a result of all of the things you've experienced in life, and even though you can actively work against it, it's not, there's unconscious bias is unconscious, and so you just don't even think about it sometimes. But traveling often opens our minds to thinking about it more, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I think travel does do that. It's you're always coming across things that are not normal to where you live, and you learn about that, and it does change the way you think about things. So,
which is why travel is so important.
Exactly.
Well, one of many, many reasons, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, Pam or Philippa, any other thoughts you wanted to share?
Not really. It's just that I just want her to keep writing. So looking forward to reading the next one, and it's just her life and just the way she sees it and is able. She's got such a talent for putting it down on paper to make it enjoyable, is probably not quite the right word, but enjoyable for the rest of us to read, and in many cases relate to, because so much that she has put in both of her books is relatable, in that we've all gone through periods in our life when either, we struggled with various things, either, material things or mentally. So for her to be able to write about it the way she does, and for us all to enjoy reading it, enjoy her story, but also look beyond that and relate to it. And, it gives us positive ideas and thoughts and that, going forward in our own lives. And for me, I think because she's not you see so many authors doing their biographies or life stories, and they're 25 or 33. To find somebody who has had more life experience, and a lot of the things she spoke about in her childhood are relatable to those of us who are that little bit on, above the midway sort of thing. So I think that's one of her talents, is being able to put that across in a relatable way, not in any way, saying, woe is me and this is what I've been through. There's none of that. Even in the first one, when they lost the home and everything, there's no, oh, woe is me, we're going to, fall in a hole and die sort of thing. It's okay. This has happened. What can we do?
What will we do? Okay, let's go on this crazy long
walk. What they did has led them to where they are now, which is
amazing.
Probably far more than they ever expected those few years ago when that happened.
And,
so
absolutely.
That's the interesting thing about this is it's such a small part of their life as well. It's only like kind of the last few years, and I'm assuming in her next book she will go back and explore more of their childhood and maybe
it'll be interesting
more
to see,
of the shenanigans.
Some more gaps.
Because in reality it's such a small part of her life. It's really that one event that got them on this path, and she wrote about it. And even then, being like an introverted person who wants to be self-sufficient and completely understand where she's coming from, because it's probably where I kind of sit, being in that same sort of mold. And I'm sure she's got some very good stories to tell.
I would read her shopping list, like, seriously. I just love it. Oh, she just got such a way with words.
I mean, she's told us about her when her and Moth met and their early days in the hiking in Scotland and that. So will she go on, hopefully, to when they settle down, when they had children, and what led to them living out there in Wales, where
exactly,
which is the home that they eventually lost. So
that's right. There's a lot of chunks missing, so that gives us hope.
We're
for
interested.
Future books. So yes, exactly. Philippa, any other last thoughts from you?
I think similarly to yourselves, it's been a really interesting read. I've enjoyed, I think, most of it, and I think what you were saying, Pam, about it being really accessible to people and relatable, I think is really important, because there's an element for me which is no longer relatable, in that I just don't have the physical health anymore to be able to do those kind of walks. So I find it really inspiring in many ways. That sounds very trite, but really inspiring to hear of, somebody who has got so many challenges. And I think that the fact that losing their home and then Moth's diagnosis coming at the same time, often when things like that, massive things in their own right, when they happen at the same time, it's such an important reminder. I'm not going to say lesson, because I think that's too kind of preachy and judgmental, but it's a reminder that it's not the end. It changes the way we live, and it changes our path moving forward. And it's in our hands and our hands alone to be able to make those decisions and make those choices. And it doesn't mean that it's a kind of rags to riches story, and that they lost everything and he had the diagnosis and now look, they're living in a mansion. It's not that kind of tale, but it's very human. And it is about actually, we do get dealt these really tough things sometimes. I'm 13 years ago today since a cancer diagnosis. And, it just changes the way that you live your life. And it's really important that within the bounds of what is possible, that you take control and do what you can do. And that, for me, is the overwhelming message in this and in the Salt Path. But having said that, I'm really in awe of how on earth they can walk these really, really very, very demanding walks when he's in such poor health.
It's incredible.
And I think, oh my goodness, I feel very inadequate in comparison. But it is a reminder that life is not easy, but we have to do the best in what we can, and we can do it. And that doesn't mean it's going to be a super, dramatic change, but it means that the changes that does bring enormous changes to your life. And I think the other thing thing that she does really beautifully, rather than kind of dwell on the kind of life lessons from it, it's just, it takes you into the landscapes that she's walking in a way that a lot of writing doesn't, and you do feel that you are there. And that is that, you know, I love that kind of being immersed. You know, when you're in the pages, you are in Iceland, you're in, you know, remote parts of Cornwall, and you know, you can feel your feet squelching and the wrinkles form under your socks as the, you know, the damp seeps in. So I really like the fact that she takes you where she has been in every sense. That's emotionally and physically.
I agree. Fabulous summary, Philippa. Thank you. I agree with everything you've said. Thank you, everybody. This is, you know, another one of my very favourite books, and how lovely to have three of you to chat with. So thank you for joining us. Thank you very much, Pam and Philippa, for joining us. And Justin, as always, thank you very much for putting up with my slackness in getting this book club together this last few months. So anyway, thank you so much, everybody. Lovely to see you all. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.